Afternoon, and welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online for Wednesday, April 5th, 2023. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. Very happy to welcome you to what we hope will be a exceptionally educational and informative session on state digital equity plans and the Digital Equity Act funding and program that is part of the federal government's initiative for broadband infrastructure, and making sure as we do deploy infrastructure, everyone has the opportunity to get access to high quality, better broadband. As I said, we have an exciting panel on this discussion, but I also want to just thank you for being with us. Just a little bit about Broadband Breakfast for those of you who maybe joined us for the first time. We're a news and events company based in Washington, D.C. We do reporting on broadband infrastructure, broadband's application and use, and big tech, and the role they play in our society. Our motto is better broadband, better lives. So we're about making sure that infrastructure gets out there and that it is available for improving those who don't have the full access to high quality and high capacity infrastructure. We've been publishing for 15 years now as a publication. We've been doing this Broadband Breakfast Live Online series for 3 years now, since the start of the pandemic. And of course, with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act nearly 18 months ago, there's been a really renewed focus on ensuring that infrastructure is out there and deployed. Again, we cover those range of topics I just laid out every Wednesday in our events. We do reporting. Just to kind of a shout out to upcoming events. Next week will be a preview for the Broadband Community Summit. So if you have any interest, or even if you don't know yet that you have an interest in attending the Broadband Community Summit in Houston, May 1st to 4th, you'll want to join our free preview next Wednesday, April 12th. The week following, we're going to be talking about green broadband, internet, and energy infrastructure. The following week, we're going to be talking about should AI be regulated? And then when we are in Houston at the Broadband Community Summit, we'll be live with a discussion on broadband and multiple dwelling units. These are just some of the upcoming events. We've got a lot of others in line. We look forward to laying out more of them very soon, including a couple of in-person programs, summits in Washington that we look forward to sharing with all of you. The last thing I want to do before turning it over to each of our panelists is give a shout out to our sponsors. We wouldn't be able to do this free programming every Wednesday, as well as all of our reporting we do every business day, without the support of sponsors, and we thank them for their support. They include Utopia Fiber, Broadband.money, Comcast, Nokia, Google Fiber, Broadband Now, Lightbox, Wireless Infrastructure Association, UCLA, Michael Baker International, Bitstream Communications, Positron Access, BroadbandToolkit.com, and the California Emerging Technology Fund. Thank you to our sponsors. And with that, let's go ahead and open the view up to all of our panelists who are part of the program here. And let's go ahead and welcome them. I'm going to briefly introduce them, particularly our kind of kickoff or keynote panelist. We're so excited that we have the Digital Equity Director for the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, Angela Ty Bennett. We're, again, so happy to give you the opportunity to lay out the federal government's and NTIA's vision for digital equity, how the Digital Equity Act funds interact with and interrelate to the BEAD funding, the middle mile funding, other programs. And Angela, just a little bit more about her. She's the first ever Digital Equity Director of NTIA, and she is responsible for the $2.75 billion from the Digital Equity Act, and to help develop guidelines for the states. Of course, the states will be the key recipient of BEAD funds. That's why they're so important. That's obviously distinct from prior NTI efforts in broadband, is this is through the states. So Angela, we look forward to hearing how your office is working with the states to leverage and force multiply the efforts. And she comes from a vast community and public sector experience, including East Cleveland's Department of Community and Economic Development, as well as being the superintendent of a community school in Cleveland. Thank you, Angela, for being with us. Let's go ahead and actually hear from you, Angela. I'll go back and introduce the other four panelists after we hear from you for 7 to 9 minutes. So the floor is yours, Angela.
All right, thanks a lot, Drew. And welcome everyone. As Drew shared, my name is Angela Thee Bennett, and I am honored to serve as the Digital Equity Director under the U.S. Department of Commerce's National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA. Next slide, please. Thank you, Em. So as we all experienced during the pandemic, the pandemic amplified what many of us, who have been working in this space already knew, and that was that access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet is not a luxury, but it is a basic necessity. And in response to the crisis that, we experienced during the pandemic, Congress passed on a bipartisan basis the bipartisan infrastructure law. And through that, it allocated $48 billion to NTIA. Of that $48 billion, $42.45 billion was for BEAD, which is the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program. And that's to bring the internet to the home. That's the last mile to connect the residents to the internet. But there's also a people-centered component to BEAD, and that's to ensure that individuals from those underrepresented, unserved and underserved areas can economically participate in this broadband infrastructure through the workforce development requirement and BEAD. Next, we also have the $2.75 billion, the Digital Equity Act program that I'm responsible for administering. And that's, to ensure that once they get access to the internet, they then have the internet enabled devices and the skills and the resources so that they can utilize the internet to fulfill their lives. And so BEAD and digital equity work together. And so they're integrated. So states have to have a digital equity plan, as a component of their BEAD. As my colleague Kevin Gallagher says, BEAD without equity is just bad. And so, states, BEAD, and digital equity teams are working very closely together. We also have the $2 billion tribal grant to provide, internet access as well as adoption and skills on tribal lands. And then we have the $1 billion middle mile infrastructure to provide that middle mile access. Next slide, please. And so under the Digital Equity Act program, we have 3 programs. So the first is a $60 million formula funding, and that's for states. And for purposes of our grants, District of Columbia and Puerto Rico are treated as states. So states, territories, and tribal entities to develop a digital equity plan. As of November of last year, all of the states were awarded their digital equity planning grant dollars, and they have 12 months to develop this plan. So we anticipate that all states will submit their completed plans by the end of this year. Early 2024, we will open the notice of funding opportunity for the state capacity grant program, which you see on screen. It's the $1.44 billion, and that's also a formula funding that will go to the states. And then the states will submit their approved plans to NTIA for the capacity grant funds to implement those plans. Shortly after opening the capacity grant program and making those awards, we will then open the competitive grant program. And that is open to local municipalities, nonprofit organizations, community anchor institutions. So it opens it up so that those other entities that are serving our covered populations have an opportunity to compete and apply for those funds. Next slide, please. And so with the planning grant funds, states are required. So these are the different components that are required in the state's digital equity plans. During the pandemic, we were in crisis mode, the country, and, we're focused on outputs, number of devices we can get out, number of hotspots we can get out. These digital equity plans is an opportunity for states and communities to take a step back and think strategically about how we are going to address the digital divide. So within these plans, we're required to, the states are required to have a vision, of measurable objectives. What are the outcomes that states want to accomplish? What are, a very robust outreach and engagement, both in not just digital equity, but in BEAD. So states are doing those outreach and collaboration because it's important to understand the barriers to digital equity, but at the same time, also recognize that, there are assets within our communities as well. And so, communities have had to do a lot with very little. And so it's important to recognize the work that is already happening on the ground to achieve equity. And then, of course, in the implementation strategy, what does that timeline look like as states plan to roll out these programs? Next slide, please. So every stakeholder plays a role. I mean, this is not an NTIA federal government or just the states. It's a whole of nation approach. We need everyone at the table, from our telecom providers to our community anchor institutions, our tribal entities, our local government, our community organizations, and then most importantly, people, the individuals that are most impacted by the digital divide. Individuals that are closest to the problems are those that are closest to the solutions. So it is so important, and we're encouraging states to not only create and make space for a seat at the planning table, but we're also encouraging states to go to the planning tables of those most impacted and listen and hear their voices and make sure that their solutions are incorporated into their plans. Next slide, please. And so here are a list of stakeholders that are eligible entities to receive sub-grants under the state's digital equity planning grants, as well as the capacity grant programs. And so I would just encourage for these stakeholders to reach out to their state broadband offices and not just reach out with saying, say here, here's an issue, but here are some solutions. And this is how we as a collaborative can help, address these solutions. So if you go to our website, internetforall.gov, you will find a map. And on that map, if you click on that state, it will provide you with the contact information for your state broadband office. It will also provide you with the contact information for the NTIA state federal program officer, who is boots on the ground, serving as a connector between the community and the state broadband office. In our quest for transparency, we hear about having a seat at the table. So it was so important that we made sure that, people knew where to find that seat. Next slide, please. And these are our cover populations that are prioritized under the Digital Equity Act, which overlap with the underrepresented communities that are in BEAD. So our low-income households, our aging populations, age 60 and over, our incarcerated individuals. States, we've been meeting with state correctional education directors. So we're talking, how do we go into the correctional institutions and train, get them trained and certified so they have jobs to, prior to release, to reduce the recidivism rates. We're going to have a large number of job creation as a result of this funding. And how are we intentional about making sure that these funding are going to people that are most impacted? Our veterans populations, our people with disabilities, people with language barriers, low literacy, and immigrant population, our racial and ethnic minorities, as well as our rural inhabitants. Know that these populations are not mutually exclusive, but they intersect. So you may have someone who's a veteran that lives in a rural community. You may have someone who's, disabled, and incarcerated. So we've been talking to the disabilities community about making sure that we are, connecting with all of the different, kind of subpopulations within these different groups. Next slide, please. And so here's where, I talked to you earlier about we are in the planning grant process right now. Next slide, please. And then the next phase is our competitive grant program. So our request for comment is an opportunity for you to help inform us how we should design and develop and evaluate our capacity and competitive grant program. We want to hear your voices. What does success look like, for our programs? What is America's extraordinary story in 2030? And how do we measure and make sure that, we achieve that? And so we have multiple ways for you to respond and provide your comments to our request for comments. You can either upload your comments in our regulations.gov. You can email us your comments, and you can mail your comments to us. So we wanted to make sure we removed barriers to be able to provide input. And, we've been working with partners such as NDIA, National Digital Inclusion Alliance, who have been hosting webinars, and we'll host some listening sessions. We're working with various organizations. So if you would like to host your own listening session to encourage your stakeholders to respond, some folks are hosting them, collecting the information, and then responding to us. Email us at digitalequity@ntia.gov, and we are more than willing to work with you to schedule a listening session and have someone from our team join and help kick off those sessions and provide whatever support is necessary. So the deadline is May 1st. By 5 p.m. Eastern. If you have any questions, I'm on the other side of that digitalequity@ntia.gov email. Be more than willing to answer, and from there I'll turn it over to you, Drew.
Wow. Thank you so much, Angela, for giving us that overview and for joining us and being with us. And I think this is great to have, the agency here who can talk about this, but as you've really emphasized, it's a whole of, not just whole of government, whole of society approach, right? And that's really key. So let me go ahead and introduce the other panelists we'll be hearing from. Again, we're super happy to have all of them. The next person will be Susan Corbett. Susan is the Executive Director of the National Digital Equity Center, and the National Digital Equity Center collaborates with local and global change makers, driving disruptive strategies to close the digital divide in Maine and across the United States. And so we look forward to hearing more about your work there, Susan. Following Susan, we're going to hear from Amy Huffman. Amy, so glad we could have you here. We enjoyed hearing a little bit about the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, at which you are policy director previously, but we're going to hear more from the role that you have and the hats you wear as a public servant, systems thinker, innovative policy expert, and storyteller. As a journalist, I love that one, right? You got to tell the stories. You got to make it clear why this matters. And you've been doing this for more than 10 years. You were the first digital inclusion and policy manager for the state of North Carolina. That's where we interacted previously. Not North Carolina, I was in Illinois with the state broadband office there, but it's just great to have you back and to tell us more about the role of NDIA in the NTIA's DEA. All right, and we're going to hear next from David Keys. David works at the intersection of information and communications technologies, and he is the digital equity advisor for the city of Seattle. We're so glad to have, not just state people, but city people. And thanks, David, for being with us to share your perspectives. You, of course, have more than 25 years of experience in guiding the city of Seattle's digital equity strategy, planning, advocacy, programs, and evaluation. And of course, Seattle has definitely been a leader at the forefront of the digital equity effort. So with that, we will then turn to our cleanup speaker, Deborah Lathan. Deborah is an attorney and policymaker who's been working on digital equity issues for 3 decades and was appointed to the senior executive position in the Cable Services Bureau, the chief of the Cable Services Bureau at the Federal Communications Commission, leading a team of 112 lawyers, economists, accountants, engineers, economists on crafting regulations governing cable, satellite TV, and the internet. and she's been running Latham Consulting since 2001. So we look forward to your thoughts as well on this topic. So with that, let's go ahead and turn it to Susan. Give us your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Drew. And thank you for inviting me today. So my name is Susan Corbett. I am the Executive Director of the National Digital Equity Center. The National Digital Equity Center was founded in 2018 to help close the digital divide in Maine and across the U.S. We provide digital skills classes there are 3 different types of classes for work and business, for home and education, and our favorite is Aging Well with Technology. We also manage affordable device programs, helping to get devices into the hands of some of our more vulnerable populations. And we promote the FCC ACP benefit, the discounted broadband discount on broadband subscriptions for families that meet the income eligibility guidelines. We also write digital equity and digital inclusion plans, and we have written probably well over 60 for different communities in the state of Maine. We were contracted with the state of Maine, the Maine Connectivity Authority, to help them write a digital equity plan for the state of Maine. And my job is to work with 13 regions across the state to help them write a regional digital equity plan. So there's lots of movement going on this front. We're excited about it. And I think what I'm most excited about is that we're engaging communities across the state in helping them understand what digital equity is, identifying the barriers to digital inclusion, and then what are the recommendations to fix it. So thanks so much, and I look forward to today's discussion.
Well, thank you. And thank you for sticking to the time, which will be necessary with all of these great panelists. Let's go ahead and turn it right over to you, Amy.
Great. Thank you, Drew. And thank you to you and the Broadband Breakfast team for having me here today. It's a pleasure to get to be with these wonderful colleagues of mine. My name's Amy. I'm the Policy Director for the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, or NDIA, if you'd like to call us by our acronym. We got started about 8 years ago to represent the folks across the country doing digital inclusion work, like Susan and David, who've been doing this work forever, but needed a collective voice to represent them in Washington. And so we take what we hear from our community to policymakers, but we also take what we hear from our community and create things like toolkits and guides and best practices, and we learn first and foremost from each other. And so I'm here to talk today about state digital equity planning. We do have a toolkit that we created with a lot of the information we've learned over the years from our community, from folks like Susan and David. But what we've been doing for the past year or so is working with states to help support them and guide them as they go through this planning process, knowing that there's a lot of requirements and not a lot of time. But we really want to make sure that we support states to reach that end goal of creating digital equity ecosystems across the country that are sustainable, that really make systems level change and support growth and opportunity in the future. And so some best practices that we've provided to states over the last year or so is that first and foremost is that community engagement piece, that it should not only be checking a box, but it needs to be meaningful and continuous, right? So community engagement is going to go well beyond the planning process, long into implementation. States and territories and the tribal organizations should be co-creating these plans with community, right? And we offer lots of recommendations on how to do that, and I can dig into that later on. Also, the plan should really reflect the people of the states and territories, right? It shouldn't just be some government looking document, right? It should reflect the actual needs and the realities that are on the ground of the individual communities. In addition, digital equity is the goal. That is a good and worthwhile goal, right? If we reach digital equity, it unlocks so many other things, economic opportunities, health opportunities, lots of other wonderful things that we want for our society. And then lastly, again, we've talked a little bit about this earlier, but aligning and integrating with the BEAD program is essential. There are 13 requirements in the BEAD 5-year action plans. There are 15 or 16 in the digital equity one, depending on how you count them. I by my count, 9 of those directly overlap and align. So states should be doing this work in tandem, making sure that the BEAD plans and digital equity plans aren't siloed, that the work is not siloed, but it works together so that everyone is working towards that same goal of universal access and digital equity simultaneously. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Drew.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. Let's turn it right to you, David. Give us your thoughts from the city of Seattle.
Great. Thanks, Drew. Thanks, everybody. Great to be here with you. Yeah, I think this is an exciting opportunity. I mean, I was part of early days when we were drafting the Federal Digital Equity Act, and part of it, and it's so exciting to see right now, is that we have this amazing framework with these 3 different parts, and then the link to BEAD to engage communities, and this opportunity for the funding will really be a critical and important booster shot, if you will, but it is, as Amy said, this opportunity to put a longer term framework in place. And as we look at the city of Seattle, and as I work with the state and nationally, again, these sort of 4 legs of the digital equity table, of that affordable and sufficient internet, the devices and that are adequate for folks, and really the people needing it both at home and on the go, thinking about the digital skills and the tech support and digital navigation these days, and then thinking about how we design applications and services that are accessible to people and reflect the communities that we work with and that we're part of. And so I think this is that sort of opportunity to bring those together. One of the things that strikes me about this planning process is there's both the need and the opportunity as we think about engaging the different population or the different communities, from those that need broadband, those that are first learning to become proficient with broadband and apply it, and then the infrastructure providers and the broadband providers and the government policy people. That part of our opportunity and our job is to do the translation between sectors, do the interpretation. So, so for folks that have traditionally worked on broadband, here's an opportunity to think more expansively and understand and think about the integration of affordability and skills and developing homegrown talent that feeds the jobs pipeline to become city employees or nonprofit employees or broadband provider employees. And so I think, thinking about how we create materials, how we serve as interpreters and engaging people in that. And it's also, as we do the participation and engagement, to inform the plans and inform the program, as Angela referred to, then I think we have an obligation to put that in a way that connect it to what's happening. What do I need to get enough food for my family, or find my childcare, or find that right next step for digital skills training. And so, and I understand, and we've seen the states have really needed to staff up in order to even do these plans. There's lots of new folks in the field who are just learning as well about digital equity and making that connection. So, so I just want to encourage that sort of iterative planning, meaningful input at meaningful times, and building these relationships so that we can put structure in place for the grants coming up and for that long-term work ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Let's turn to you, Deborah, to give us your thoughts before we open to all of us here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversations that we've had so far. The perspective I come from, as I said, 3 decades ago, and I was at the FCC before we were even doing video streaming. But at that time, we recognized the importance of the internet, and we recognized some of the future potential. And so I'm just excited to finally see, possibly the beginnings of the ubiquitous, not just deployment, but utilization of broadband. So I know about, infrastructure, but as we know, this is not build it and they will come. We know that broadband passes about 95% of households, yet only 77% of people subscribe. And so the question, really a big question, is going to be, how do we get adoption? How do we get people to adopt? And I think the focus has got to be on affordability, because we know it's basically lower income people who do not subscribe to broadband. And we have the ACP plan that provides subsidies for qualifying households to basically get a subsidy to get broadband for up to $30 a month. And yet we have not seen the uptake that we think we should have seen. 48 million people are eligible, but only 18 million people have actually signed up for it. So I think we really have to have a push to get people to sign up for the ACP, and not just to get them to sign up for the awareness programs, but also to get the government to extend that program, because we estimate by the middle of next year, we'll probably run out of funding for ACP. And, that's probably one of the worst things you can do, is sign people up and then drop the program. Because I think another major factor impacting adoption is trust. Okay. And it is, people don't trust government. A lot of lower income people who have lived at the edge of society.
Dad, are you ready for my new book?
Hello?
Muffler?
Dad, look.
Murph, what happened to your piece? Oh,
Reminder to please mute, please
Uh,
mute, please mute. Yeah, it's someone who, our defaults are to go on mute all of the time, but some people unmute themselves. So
Oh.
my apologies, Deborah. Go ahead.
Okay. So what I'm saying is trust is a huge issue, and distrust has been built over centuries. Okay. And so so it's very important that you have to work with local communities and using people in those communities that other people trust. And so I like to stress that you have to have digital navigators, people who can knock on doors, and when the door is open, the person opening the door trusts the person that's standing at the door. I think digital navigators is crucial. The other thing is, even though a lot of people know how to use their cell phones, they don't really know how to use computers to do some of the basic things that make a spreadsheet, the kind of things that you need to be able to go into the workforce. And we know that job skills, right now, they say over 90% of jobs are going to require some level of digital literacy. So I think an emphasis really has to be put on digital literacy programs and on having the community very involved in what's going on. So basically, and then a critical thing, though, is I think when you're identifying where the need is, it's local. And I mean, down to the Census Bureau block. You can look in some communities and see a desert in a community where broadband is not available. And the FCC has done mapping on this issue. So it's very important to really look at your communities and identify where the unserved are and where the underserved are, and it's a block by block endeavor. So I think I'm still within my time frame. So those are pretty much my comments.
You're good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Deborah. And let's kind of open it up and maybe give Angela an opportunity to kind of react. What are you looking for by this May 1 date you've put out there, Angela, and then what's kind of next? Give us a little timeline reaction to the way that all of the players, including some that we've heard from here today, fit into these various programs.
Well, after the May 1st deadline, we've started, reviewing comments. So we're looking at those comments to help inform how are we going to evaluate these plans that are being submitted to the states. There's questions in there about the public comment period. So states are required to post their digital equity plans for 30 days. and receive public comment from it, and then also respond to the comments that they've received. So we want to hear from the community, how should that be managed? And then we're going to come back to the community and say, hey, here are, we've released this, RFC for 6 days. Here's the comments that we received. And those comments will help inform how we design and develop this capacity grant program. And then from there, we will, open the notice of funding opportunity, in early 2024. So we would like to hear, there's 24 questions. NDIA has done a really great job, as much as we tried to make it as plain language as possible within the federal government, there was still a little bit more work that needed to happen. And I just appreciate, NDIA stepping forth and translating our RFC into plain language and hosting, webinars to encourage individuals to respond. So if there's research, if there's evidence that you have to kind of support your position, we also have questions in there around specifically for youth, because our youth are members of 7 out of our 8 covered population. So if there are organizations that are serving our young people, I encourage them to respond and help inform, what those metrics should look like. This is critical for this community because not just this community, but the organizations here, is that under our competitive grant program, there's questions around scoring. How should we score these applications? What is the criteria that we should be taken into account? How much should we weigh, the state's plans and the gaps, so all of those questions are so important. And,
right.
And my job as the digital equity director is not to make these decisions solo. I'm here to advocate and be that voice and amplify the needs and the voices of the community. So really, really encouraging community to come out and just respond. And you don't have to answer all the questions. Choose the questions that, are most relevant.
Angela, just to kind of drill into, this was on page 3 of the presentation you made. And by the way, for those who have been asking, that we do have those posted on the event page for this event on Broadband Breakfast. And I'm sure obviously NTIA has posted these too. You highlighted 3 separate programs that together equal 2.75 billion. The state planning grants, the state capacity grants, and the competitive. Would you say most of what we've been talking about here is focused on the competitive, or could you just maybe distinguish for a moment between the state planning, the state capacity, and what they're going to be doing with that 60 million and 1.44 billion, and then the competitive grant program that will obviously be of interest to a lot of people outside of the states?
So the state planning is the process that we're in right now. States are in the process of developing their digital equity plans. They will then take those plans, that's the 60 million. They will then take those plans and submit them to our capacity grant program. And that's the $1.44 billion that's available. The eligible entities under the competitive grant program, I just want to note, you don't have to wait until the competitive grant program to participate. One, you should be participating now in the planning process. If you're not at the planning table, you're not going to be, it's less likely that you'll be at the implementation. So all these organizations need to get to the planning table like right now. And you need to have input and make sure your voices are heard. And so then you're also eligible as sub-grantees under the capacity grant program. States are going to need organizations to implement these plans. And that's where those are opportunities for you to also show up and be able to participate. And we encourage states to invest in the organizations that are boots on the ground doing the work within their states. When these plans, when this funding is expended, we need to make sure that we're building the capacity of the organizations that are serving these communities so this work can continue.
Who else on the panel would like to speak about the distinction, if you will, between the state grants, the state, not just the planning that we're in the middle of, the state capacity grants, and then competitive grants. How do you all at NDIA and at the National Digital Equity Center and as consultants and in the city, how do you view these kind of various programs?
I just wanted, I'll jump in here. This is David, because I think it's so, as Angela said, so one piece of it is it's really important to have the kind of diverse organizations take a seat at the table, and for states to work with us and recognize the lived knowledge that folks have, or the trusted ambassadors that are in the community. And when the Digital Equity Act was being written, part of what the intent was to both encourage at the state level, at a broader functional level, systemic level, to be supporting in local communities digital equity, and also to do things like being able to support building coalitions, having state advisory groups, having some of that capacity to see across communities and share best practices and exchanges. And then we also wanted to make sure that, so part of that then is to then let's fund implementation at the state level and through the state. And sometimes the states also know what's needed and where investments are needed, and use that opportunity to link to other state initiatives. And then the competitive fund was, let's make sure that there's still an opportunity, a separate opportunity to go direct to get funds. So if something wasn't necessarily in the state plans, and recognizing some of the incredible grassroots work that happens from people local closest to the communities. So we wanted to create a structure that provided some of both of those. And that's why there's both the competitive program that with all sorts of organizations and local government and so on can apply direct to NTIA for, and the state capacity building grants that will be coming out.
Does anyone else like to weigh in on that?
I just wanted to make a comment about the planning, and as it moves into those capacity grants, you know, working with organizations and entities across the state. We're meeting people where they are. We're hearing from lived experts. They are all contributing to this plan. And I think that that's a really important piece that we just have to stay focused on, identifying those barriers. What's the recommendation? How are we going to fix it? But we have to hear from all voices, not just the higher level, you know, government organizations, but the organizations that are serving our covered population, the people in the field doing this work, and those lived experts who are actually experiencing some of those barriers.
Thanks for the questions that you're posing. Keep them coming. We'll try to get to as many. We have some dialogue going on here about the Affordable Connectivity Program, including some feedback that it's a nightmare, in the words of Christine Hallquist, that is causing access problems in Vermont. And then I think, Amy, you weighed in the comments that the process is more complicated than it should be, and you see it getting better. Does anyone want to speak about either the ACP process or how it can be improved here?
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly just to clarify. So I do know that the FCC has recently and is in the process of rolling out updates to its application process to make it more seamless. They did hear people's feedback that it was a nightmare to get enrolled in the program. Susan and Dave are much more connected to people on the ground, actually enrolling people in the process, so can speak more to specific details than I, but in general, I do know updates are coming. However, I think it's really important to continue for all of us to give the FCC that feedback to make this a process that is trusted by consumers, right? As Deborah pointed out, when a program like this, distrust has been built over centuries. It's not going to be rebuilt overnight, but things like making an application process not usable for the everyday person, that builds distrust, that adds on that layer. So we need to make sure to continue to give the FCC that sort of good feedback. And then I just do want to highlight and lift up what Deborah was pointing out earlier, that the program is at this point set to run out mid-year next year. And that is problematic, not only for all the households that are currently on the program, which is about 18 million, but the potential households that could be benefiting from this program. And then all of these other programs, these other federal funding streams that we're talking about are built on the, like, with the ACP in mind. So the capital projects funds are, those networks will be coming online soon. And those projects and those households are expecting to be able to sign up for the Affordable Connectivity Program. So it needs to be there. The BEAD program is built on the Affordable Connectivity Program. And then the Digital Equity Act is $2.75 billion is a lot of money, but that's not enough to cover affordability, devices, skills, everything for the foreseeable future. It needs the Affordable Connectivity Program to be alongside it in order for it to be as effective as it can possibly be.
Deborah, I know you've got some thoughts on this, and
Yeah.
you've also helped do some best practices on digital equity programs.
And so one thing, first starting out with just the signing up of people, because the FCC process, is difficult. And so one thing that we have done here in some of the churches, we've got digital navigators actually signing people up on site and explaining and making it easier. So that's one thing. But the other thing that I would say is that, this extension of the ACP, it's urgent. I mean, it's like advocacy needs to start on it now, because we have a divided Congress and an election year will be coming and it'll be lost. And if we don't get the funding for ACP, it deepens the digital divide in terms of trust, because it's like, okay, they signed me up, I got going, and now they cut me off. I think it has a long resounding impact on people's willingness to trust government if we can't, if this program does not continue.
Angela.
Hey, thanks, Drew. I just wanted to, make 2 points. The challenges in, signing up for ACP, we recognize that those are barriers that I would say that it's barriers to access, and we need to remove, these different barriers that, exist for our covered populations. I will say that we are working with the FCC to, share some of the concerns that we're hearing back from community as well. And then we're also encouraging states to enter into data sharing agreements with USAC so that we can, remove those barriers to sign up. I would also encourage folks to reach out to their states, because it's still an affordability issue. So ACP is one tool, and there are income, restrictions in order to be eligible. And there are still segments of our population that don't qualify for ACP, but can't afford the internet. And that's a very real issue. And so if we are truly wanting to accomplish internet for all, we also need to, make sure that we are ensuring that, that population, are working, poor, that aren't eligible are also, able to, receive access.
Lot of great questions continuing to come in about the ACP and other topics. One point just been made is that the verification on ACP is easy. It's the ISP integration that's harder. Let's leave that to another day. I want to get to some other topics for our experts here. One is the role of state broadband programs. We talk a lot with state broadband leaders on Broadband Breakfast Live Online programs and other events. And I'm just wondering, is there any kind of plan or organized way to integrate how do each of you in your various roles work with state broadband officers and get them thinking and making sure they're thinking BEAD is not just about infrastructure, it's about adoption, use, affordability, relevance, all of those things that are needed, that I hear you all saying are needed to make broadband not just about, feeds and speeds, but about changing people's lives. Any thoughts on that, and integration with the state broadband leaders in their process?
I can jump in. So the state of Maine has had a quasi-government agency to manage broadband since about 2006, the Connect Maine Authority. Our governor then created the Maine Connectivity Authority to help manage some of these federal funds that are coming in. Our digital equity work is being done alongside that broadband work being managed by Maine Connectivity Authority. So everyone is aware of the issues that we have in identifying barriers to broadband. And then, of course, there's all the infrastructure work being done at the same time. So we are working all in one, under one agency.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just add that what Susan just described is the situation across most of the states. So when only other states are still creating two separate plans, but it's under the same office.
David, go ahead as well.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing to see the state digital equity coordinators coming in. I would say that there's still, we work closely with our broadband office. I think there's two elements to making the connection to digital equity. So one is that, yeah, it's really important to be in contact and support and work closely with the broadband office. A long-term issue is how well funded those broadband offices are. We actually in Washington State had a broadband office that went away for a few years and kind of came back. So it's still, how well that's maintained is a long-term question as well. And I think the other piece of that is sort of kind of structurally two things to do. One is, encourage the broadband offices to be working with other agencies, even at the local level. The question is, how do I in the Seattle Information Technology Department work across with our Immigrant and Refugee Affairs Office, our Human Services offices? And so making those linkages across agencies and having an ongoing mechanism for doing that, and mechanism with the community is part of it. Also codifying some things. So we added in some definitions around covered populations and digital equity, and we established the framework for a digital equity opportunity grant into state law in Washington. So some of those things I think are also helpful to make that connect between the broadband deployment and broadband adoption side of things.
We still have a few minutes, about 7 minutes left. Deborah Lathan had another commitment. We appreciate her joining us, and she had to leave. But there's been some chatter on the Zoom chat, and we feel free to put questions on that or on the others. We can see those as well, about digital navigators. And I just we haven't heard that term yet today. I just want to get this group's gut check on how effective, how helpful are they, and what do we need to do to kind of make those a part and parcel of digital equity efforts? Who would like to take that question?
I think I'll start, but Susan should definitely jump in. So digital navigator is actually a relatively new term. It actually started during the pandemic, and NDIA was really pivotal. And we heard a lot from across our community and our affiliates nationwide that people were beginning to try to figure out how to help people navigate getting online while being remote. And so we created a digital navigator working group, and that working group together with us co-created a model. And so that model is free and available on our website. And we've just seen it take off. It is a crucial and vital and pivotal service, we believe. It's shown to be extremely effective to make sure that there's somebody helping navigate people getting online. So where to go to get an affordable device, or how to get connected to the Affordable Connectivity Program, and somebody that can help navigate all those different things. And we're hopeful that through all of these federal investments that we'll see more digital navigator individuals get established across the country, but also statewide programs that provide digital navigation services.
Right. Is the digital navigator natural home in the long term going to be at a state broadband agency? Is it going to be at internet service providers? Is it going to be libraries? I mean, who is or all of the above? Who is going to kind of serve this function in the longer term future? Let's hear from Susan, David, and Angela.
Yeah,
Yes.
they need to be on the ground. So that's I think let's hear from Susan.
Thanks, Amy. That's a great introduction. So digital navigators are trusted guides. And you know what? We've had digital navigators going on for quite a few number of years. They've just been called other things. They've been called volunteers. They've been called outreach workers. They've been called instructors. And now we're sort of capturing it under this title of digital navigator. They are trusted guides that are working in communities, working at local libraries, adult education programs, older adult organizations, healthcare organizations, community centers, and they are helping people sign up for the ACP benefit, learning how to turn on a device. You know, someone who gets a tablet and they can't figure out where the button is to turn it off and on. Helping them sign up for an email address, because we have to have an email address in order to participate in so many different things that are in our digital lives. So it is a new term, it is a new job, but I think we're going to hear more and more about it. We're seeing digital navigators in the state of Maine. We're training them all because we want to be sure that they're all receiving the same information, so there's continuity from program to program. So this is a really exciting next step in the digital inclusion world.
I want to get in another question here, and then we'll give everyone an opportunity to make, some closing thoughts. My good friend Frank Odez has raised a point that I think is worth raising, which is the potential dangers or downsides of being online. And Frank, I'm sorry, we don't have time to hear your question. I'm just going to summarize it as I just have. But what's different between now and the previous broadband build out, if you will? And as I've alluded, I was the state broadband officer for Illinois during BTOP and during the state broadband initiative. And everyone was excited to get online. It was an infrastructure, it was an adoption use. And as I've mentioned, we also cover and report on big tech. And now, on the other hand, so people are raising lots and lots of concerns about potential dangers of being online. And so I want to give each of our panelists a chance to address that, or anything else on your minds, as we do have just a few minutes. Let's go ahead and hear in the same order we started. What do you say to people who are just concerned about potential dangers of being online? Angela.
Well, I would say within these digital equity plans, cybersecurity is definitely a requirement for states to be thinking about this. I was just last week a victim, saw, getting pings. Someone had compromised 3 of my accounts. So that just happened. So it's not that if it will happen, it's when will it happen? And we have to be thoughtful. And those are very real concerns that we need to be thoughtful about and make sure that it's incorporated, throughout and not an afterthought of when something happens. And it is a risk. And I think it's a matter of when we are people-centered, we're not forcing people to do things that they're uncomfortable with. And I think we have to be sensitive to that everyone doesn't want to engage in the internet in the same way. And it's really about finding out what people want to engage in the internet in and making sure that they have the skills and abilities to do so, and then respecting their right to not engage in the internet in other ways.
Thank you for those great remarks, and thanks for being with us. Let's hear from Susan and then Amy and David.
So for all of our new participants to the program, we strongly encourage them to take an internet safety class. But the classes that I think are really important is under our Aging Well with Technology. We have older adults who are coming online for the first time. So helping them to protect their online presence, protecting themselves against fraud and abuse, identifying fake news, making sure their passwords are strong. So I think that work is vital for anyone who is, even for old users on the internet. I think taking a refresher in internet safety can be very helpful.
Amy, David?
Yeah, well, Frank, it's good to see you again. And I agree with Susan. What I would just back up and say is I agree with Angie that this planning process is really a great place to make sure that we're setting up systems that holistically address all of these needs, and that so we can identify folks like Susan and her programs to invest in, scale, in both the capacity process and then the competitive, and then moving on into the future. We need more Susans in the world across the country. And we need to make sure that the trusted folks across the country who are already doing this work have the resources and the capacity that they need to continue doing the good work that they're already doing.
Thank you. David, give us the
Yeah,
last
I would
word.
just say, great, and thanks again. But I do think I agree with this concern about privacy, safety, security, and trust. And so this need to put in systems to support people and to help with the education. So and looking at iterative levels of helping people with the skills and the capacity to be able to understand the privacy and trust issues and security issues and how to address them on their devices and in their online use. So this is an opportunity to include that in your plans too.
Well, this has been a very rich and robust discussion. Unfortunately, the hour has zoomed by, and we like to start on time and end on time. On behalf of our panel, Angela Dia-Bennett, Susan Corbett, Amy Huffman, David Keys, and of course, Deborah Lathan, who's had to leave. We want to thank each of you for being with us, and on behalf of you, and we'll see you next week. I'm Drew Clark with Broadband Breakfast every Wednesday at 12 noon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.